Greetings everyone, Steve Wilkens, Golden Harvest Agronomy Manager. In this week's agronomy video series, you want to spend some time to talk about the pollination process, more specifically the VT time period of the corn plant. We don't want to cover three different things in this video. First and foremost, what's going on with our plant in terms of water use, fertility. We also want to cover the ins and the outs of the silks, as well as the tassel and pollination, and then ultimately, what do we have to do now to ensure success both during pollination and the rest of the growing season. So right now at VT, our plant is essentially done growing. We've reached max height, all of our internodes have elongated, and our roots, for the most part, are done growing as well. So we have what we have in terms of the physiological component of our corn plant. What's happening now with our plant is, as we're gearing up towards pollination, is we're at what we call peak water use of our corn plant. On any given day, we're using about 0.25 to 0.3 inches of water per day. Obviously, that depends upon heat and temperature, but on average, that's what we could figure our corn plants are using. So we've got a huge demand now to feed the pollinating component of our corn crop. In situations where we're dry and we don't have that much water and we're stressed, what we can expect is a little bit of asynchrony between the silks and the tassels. Thankfully for most of us, we received good shots of rain here in the past day or two, and we're sitting very good as we head into pollination. From a fertility standpoint, right now, most of our potassium has been taken up. Research from the University of Illinois has shown that about 80% of the K levels that we need in our plant have been taken up, so we've got about 20% left to go. But that's not the same with other nutrients. Specifically, if we look at nitrogen, at the point of pollination, we still have roughly around 20 to 25% of our nitrogen needs that'll be taken up post-flower. And more than that, when you look at nutrients such as phosphorus, sulfur, zinc, and copper, we take those up season long. Specifically in the case of phosphorus, roughly half of our plant's need is still yet to be taken up. So that really necessitates, at this point in the season, to understand our fertility and to know what we have going on. I'd recommend for people to go out and to really take a soil test, a tissue sample, and to understand what's in your plant, also what's in your soil, and do you have enough to carry this plant through for the rest of the year. When you deal with macronutrients such as phosphorus and even sulfur to that matter, it potentially could be too late to do something yet this year, but that gives us the opportunity to look at what we have to do next year to make sure that doesn't happen again. I'd also encourage people to take a strong look at the nutrient boron. Borons need peaks at about this time of the growing season, and it's something simple that we can put into a tank if we're applying a fungicide to really ensure that boron isn't a limiting factor. Every year, Golden Harvest Agronomy goes out and we soil sample and we tissue sample a lot of customers' fields. And what our data tells us year in and year out when we look at it and get it back is that boron is one of the biggest nutrient deficiencies that we see every single year. So I'd really encourage us to get out to look at that and to, at a minimum, understand where we are from that standpoint with boron, because it is so critical in the pollination process. As we look at a few things specifically around pollination, a couple of things to know. First, we'll start with the tassel. Is usually around V5 is when our tassel starts to form within the plant. And that'll start to go up through the vegetative stages. And typically, about 3 to 4 to 5 days prior to silk emergence, we start to see our tassels come out and shed. Now, the pollen from the tassel will give us about 2 to 3 million pollen grains, but they don't move very far. Certainly with wind currents, they can move long distances, but on average, the vast majority of our pollen is falling within 20 to 50 feet of the plant. More specifically, when you look at a corn plant with both a male and a female part, only 5% of the plants are self-pollinated, so pollen flow also becomes very important, and we need that type of movement. Now, a tassel as far as viability is going to last on average about 5 to 8 to maybe 10 days. This year, we have a lot of variability. We'd expect pollination to probably happen maybe closer to a 2-week time period, but regardless of our duration, when you see a tassel, the 3rd or 4th day is typically when we get the most pollen coming from the tassel, and more specifically, within the day, pollen is most viable early in the morning. If we have wet weather, dews, humidity, pollen is really suppressed, so you're typically looking at that mid to late morning when pollen is really at peak for the given plant. Once we look a little bit around temperature, warm temperatures kills pollen viability and flow. Typically, if you're in the upper 80s to low 90s, the viability of the pollen shed really suppresses and pushes back as well. When you look at our silks, the silks typically emerge 3 to 4 days after you start to see the tassel, and silks are primarily 90% water. In situations where we have ample water, we typically don't have any problem with silking, but when we have years where we're drought stressed, we're dry, the silks are always competing with the plant for additional water, and sometimes we have problems and we have what we miss the nick of pollination simply because of that. So from our silks, what we want to see is good, long emergence. We get the pollen to fall down on the silks then go down, and about 24 hours later, they'll pollinate and make the little corn kernel. So that's a little bit about our duration of time. Silks typically grow mostly at night when it's a little bit cooler. Again, warm temperatures will really start to pull back on what we can do from a silking standpoint. On average, a silk can last up to 10 days, but again, it's earlier in its life. 3 to 4 to 5 days is when the majority of our silks are going to get pollinated. This year here in 2023, we've got really good conditions for pollination across most of the Corn Belt. I think we're sitting very, very good. So from that standpoint, what I'd like to take as our call to action here at this point in the season is let's understand our fertility. Let's make sure we don't have any limiting factors there. Let's start to contemplate and look at fungicide usage. Let's control our insect population so we don't have anything eating on the silks and reducing our pollination. You know, typically a corn ear is going to give us around 1,000 kernels. On average, though, we're pollinating between 400 and 700, and it just shows you that there's a lot more out there to have if we can make sure that our nutrients, our bugs, and everything are controlled to help make sure pollination is as successful as possible. Those are a couple of things around corn pollination around the VT time period. We hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, if you have more questions, please reach out to your Golden Harvest agronomist and/or seed advisor. Thank you.